So therefore, the Department of Justice would have to pursue that. But for someone who would say, I'm going to pardon these patriots for breaking into the Capitol, harming and assaulting law enforcement officers, threatening members of Congress and employees who work in the Capitol. And if you remember, they chanted, hang Mike Pence, who at the time was Vice President of the United States. My position is those individuals should never be pardoned because their insurrectionist activities is not who we are as a nation. So in our opinion, as a committee, he created it, but in this position, he's absolutely wrong in even entertaining the notion of pardoning people who would do such a dastardly deed as what occurred on January 6th.
And staying with that, there's been some saying that since the president-elect has threatened to go after people, you and that President Biden should therefore give preemptive pardons. You have said that you would take a preemptive pardon from President Biden as he reportedly considers this for people that Trump has threatened, like current and former House members he's called to be imprisoned for their work on the January 6th committee. Are you expecting a pardon from President Biden, and are you worried about the safety of your colleagues in the next Congress?
Well, what I'm more concerned about is the separation of powers authority inherent in our Constitution. We are a legislative body. Our committee was tasked with the responsibility as a legislative body to do just what we did. Now some member of the executive branch who decides that what the legislative branch did was wrong and they should go to jail is not what the law. But, you know, Donald Trump is known not to follow the law. He's a convicted felon. He's been excused for some of his activities because a Supreme Court determined that they were in the pursuit of his responsibility. We differ with that, but nonetheless, the Supreme Court ruled. But to be honest with you, Rael, as I look at it, it's clear from our vantage point that we did our job. It's clear that in doing our job, Donald Trump disagreed with it. But to threaten someone with jail because you disagree with them is not who we are as a nation. And we got to be number one as a nation because we settle our differences either at the ballot box or in the court of law. Just because an individual dictates what he wants, that's not the law. And in this instance, Donald Trump is wrong.
In light of that, do you fear that Donald Trump will try and go after, target U.S. chairman and others in the committee, and therefore that people that are saying President Biden
I don't think
should
there's any doubt. He's not.
Well, let me ask this.
I don't think there's any doubt.
He'll go after you. There's no doubt. I assume you're saying that he'll go after people. So in light of that, do you think President Biden should do preemptive pardons, and would you accept one if he offered it?
Well, let me say this. If the president, in his infinite wisdom, determined that the work of our committee was legitimate and that we should not be penalized for doing what we as members of Congress should do, and he offers that pardon, I will take it. Look, I know what the Trump administration say they will do. If he says it, he will try to do it. The law has nothing to matter in his eyes. So for Benny Thompson's perspective, and I hope the other members of the committee, if President Biden offers it, take it. The people who support me say, look, we voted for you. Because we voted for you, you're not to be penalized for doing your job. There's a difference between right and wrong and doing your job.
Right.
Former president and soon to be president again, Trump, takes everything so personally. You know, it's so unfortunate that to differ with a person, you're threatened with going to jail. We are a better country than that, Rev. And so at some point, you either have to stand against this kind of action or you'll fall for anything.
Now, it's not just the January 6 attackers that Trump has elevated for taking the law into their own hands. He's just hosted former U.S. Marine Daniel Penny at yesterday's Army-Navy football game, just days after Penny was acquitted of murder in his chokehold killing of Jordan Neely here in New York last year. Like the insurrectionist, Penny's actions have made him a hero to the right, including J.D. Vance, who said he should be admired for his, quote, courage. He choked a man to death, unarmed man, making disturbances, but unarmed, no physical threat. Anyone said that he in any way physically went after them. With this kind of support for violent vigilantism from the incoming administration, do you think we'll see more of it when they enter the White House?
Well, unfortunately, I think we will. It's not, I think, who we are as a country. But when I look at the people who are being identified with going into this administration, when I look at his FBI nominee, when I look at his intelligence recommendation, all these individuals are on record being extreme about this government of ours not doing what it should for certain people. And this notion that all of a sudden diversity, equity, and inclusion is a bad word. And so the founding fathers, in their infinite wisdom, created this document that was for all people. Now, when you try to explain what all these people mean, then somehow it's bad. And so we have, as Democrats, to look at this, and we have to make sure that we stand on the rule of law. It's not about the rule of an individual. This is not an authoritarian government. It's not a dictatorship. It's a democracy. In a democracy, Reverend, you are not put in jail for having a difference of opinion. And so, unfortunately, President-elect Trump is not of the rational result of a democracy. He wants it to be all about him, and that's so unfortunate. But for a lot of us, we are the loyal opposition. We'll stand on principle, and that's where we'll stand.
I'm out of time, but I must ask you one last question in light of what you're saying. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., President-elect picked to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, is set to head to the Capitol this week for meetings with multiple senators. Last week, his lawyer petitioned the Food and Drug Administration to revoke its approval of the polio vaccine, which has saved millions of people over several decades from the disease's impact. It's just one of the many vaccines that Trump has campaigned, that Kennedy has campaigned against, along with the treatment of drinking water with fluoride. Mississippi is a beautiful state. I've been down, as you know, in your district. Right. I've done things with you there. But it struggles with poor metrics in nearly every health-related outcome, and particularly for its poor, Black, and rural residents. If Kennedy is confirmed, how will his policies impact vulnerable communities, some of which you represent in Congress?
Well, there's no question. If Kennedy and his policies go forward, if he's confirmed, there will be more people dying unnecessarily, simply because we can prevent it. We rid our country of the scourge of polio because we started vaccinating all our citizens. We required it. Now they want to all of a sudden do away with it. This junk science is not who we are as a nation. Now our medical researchers and professionals are saying we would be headed in the wrong direction. I believe medical science and those who work in it, rather than somebody who's basically a quack in terms of what he's talking about.
Thank you for being with us, Mississippi Congressman and former chair of the January 6th Committee, Chair Benny Thompson. Now to the anxious anticipation that civil rights groups are feeling over the incoming Trump administration and what it means for our civil liberties. Joining me now is Deborah Archer, president of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Good to have you on, Ms. Archer. Civil and human rights advocacy groups, including I Had One, have strongly criticized the president-elect's pick to lead the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Conservative legal advocate Harmeet Dillon, another Trump loyalist who has participated in efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. If confirmed, she would preside over the federal enforcement of our civil and voting rights. What's the ACLU's position on having Dillon in this job right now?
Well, first, thank you for asking me to join you. At the ACLU, we don't endorse or oppose nominees for politically appointed offices. But of course, we're well aware of how essential the Civil Rights Division is to the protection of civil liberties and civil rights. DOJ's Civil Rights Division plays a critical role in defending the most fundamental rights and freedoms. And Eric Holder once called it the jewel of the Justice Department, and that's for good reason. The division has been at the forefront of efforts to dismantle systemic racism, to promote voting rights and voting access, and to defend marginalized groups from discriminatory practices. And during President Trump's first administration, he really did stack the Justice Department with people who turned back the clock on civil rights enforcement. And that could ring true in his second administration as well. With this nominee, the positions I understand she's taken in recent years in regards to vulnerable and marginalized communities, transgender people, voters of color, as well as her support of lawsuits challenging the 2020 election, are all deeply concerning. And there is some indications that she's going to prioritize discrimination against white people and a focus on dismantling important tools of inclusion, even as we continue to see incidents of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ bias, and anti-Black racism on the rise. And while the ACLU doesn't endorse or oppose nominees for politically appointed positions, we certainly encourage the Senate to take its advise and consent responsibility seriously by carefully considering the civil rights and civil liberties record of all nominees, including this one. Our Civil Rights Division deserves a leader who recognizes and works to fix the systemic injustices that continue to harm people in communities of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, and other vulnerable communities. And their decisions shape the nation's progress towards a society where we all have a voice and we all have access to equal opportunity.
Now, and the present head of that division has worked, I think, my personal opinion, very diligently in that area and has a track record that's probably the best I've seen. But civil rights groups are also alarmed at Trump's mass deportation plan that will disproportionately hurt Hispanic families and people of color, Haitians, others. And now we've learned several far-right militia groups want to help the president-elect with his purge. The Trump team has rejected the offer so far, insisting they will only use state and federal resources, though Trump's incoming border